5-ish, wasn't it?
5, yeah, around 5, and we got to sleep in our own beds,
Yes.
and we didn't. I told her, I said, I felt like getting up during the night and running up down the hall and banging on some doors so I feel like I was at home, you know, but I didn't do that. I just went to sleep, and it was nice. But we had a nice day, a nice trip, and got to meet some nice people, saw some beautiful places, so but we were ready to be home. In James 3, he talks about the untamable tongue, and I talked about that just a little bit the other day, I think, but the thing that I got kind of intrigued with, and I'll tell you a story or two later on, but he starts off, he says, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers." And you know, it's always amazed me with people. A lot of people, they want to preach, they want to teach, and I've met people over the years that, in fact, we had one here at one time, and he informed me several different times that he was a preacher. He was a preacher, and so finally we let him speak, and in fact, I don't think I was here. I got a report from Lance, and Lance said, "Don't do it again." So, you know, it's not, the thing of it is being a preacher, that doesn't make us any better than anybody else. It doesn't make us any more special. That's just the work that we choose to do, and we're all teaching, we're all leading people, we're directing people, and so James says here, just stop, stop. And he wants them to understand that just words are not going to be very beneficial. They have to be accompanied by actions. And we see that all the time in lives. And then he's saying that blessings will be bestowed upon those who hear and do, and not upon those who hear and do not. And so those are the basic lessons that he gives here in this chapter. And he says that if you're a teacher, you're going to receive a stricter judgment. And that's kind of a scary thing to think about. But we live in a world today where there is a lack of responsibility with people. We see it. We saw that on our trip all of the time. You see it in life in general. People, you go to the grocery store and you're standing there in line, and somebody comes up and pushes in front of you, and that type of thing. There's a lack of responsibility, a lack of respect. And so when James teaches about this, he said that you've got to realize that whenever you're teaching, and you think about it, and this is not just public teaching, it's also in private. If you teach something that is incorrect, then you're going to be held accountable. If that person loses their soul, in my mind, you're going to be held accountable. Think so, Jimmy?
Yes.
And we met a couple. It's interesting when you meet these people on these trips. We were in the restaurant, or the dining, not really the restaurant. It's where you go and have breakfast. It's got little tables and stuff, and there was this man and woman sitting in there, and we really didn't even address them, but the woman kind of began to interdict her thoughts and so on and so forth. And when we got ready to leave, she said, "I can marry you, I can baptize you in something else. I'm ordained." And I had to bite my tongue and walk away. I wanted to say, "You've never read Paul's letter, evidently, in 1 Corinthians 14. You never read that," because, well, she was so proud of herself. And I thought, well, that's okay. You'll have to answer to God. Because I've seen so many people, they'll read, and I want to read it. It's not in James, but I want to read it. I want to just, while I'm thinking about it, I want you to look at this with me, and I want you to think about what he said, what Paul said here. He said, my eyes are tired, I think. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 14 and 34. And I want you to listen, and guys, I want you to, if you have something to say about this, I'd love for you to. Paul said, "Let your women keep silent in the churches." I'm going to ask you a question. Did he exclude anyone, any woman? Did he say some women don't have to? No. He said, let your women keep silence in the churches. And then he said, for they are not permitted to speak. Now this lady that could marry and bury and whatever else it was she could do, evidently she thought this didn't apply to her because she was ordained. I started to say I was too back in 75. It didn't change anything. It just meant that I had been set aside. And they don't understand the word ordained. The word ordained means that you've been set aside to do something. When we ordain an elder, they're set aside for that work. A deacon, they're set aside for that work. It doesn't give you any special privileges or authority. It just says that God recognizes you. And what they don't realize is when you are ordained, that means you have greater responsibility because you're going to be teaching other people. The word ordained is a word that doesn't probably, we shouldn't even use that word anymore. But he goes on to say they're not permitted to speak, but they are to be submissive, as the law also says. The law of Moses taught that. Now, in the law of Christ, the new law, teaches the same thing. And then he says, and if they want to learn anything, let them ask their own husbands at home. Well, for years, I had people that I talked to about this. They would say, what if she doesn't have a husband? Well, if you go to the Greek and you study it, what Paul is saying is, if they don't have a husband, they should ask a man away from the assembly. That's what it says. Now, we could argue all day long about this. Well, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem fair and all that sort of thing. Well, sadly, that's God's rule. And I don't have the authority to change it, neither is that woman or anyone else. And so he goes on to say it's shameful for women to speak in church. Now, we could argue that all day long. I've had people say, well, Paul was a woman hater. I don't think that's an issue. I don't think that's part of the discussion. This was God's rule, not Paul's. God gave Paul this rule. And he said, he says, or did the word of God come originally from you? And so Paul, I think at this point in time, we don't know what was going on, but there were evidently some issues and some problems that were created because of this. And so God gave Paul these instructions. And so when I see the Joyce Myers and all these different ones like that think that they're preachers and they can be on TV and do, I'm sorry, God didn't authorize that. And that's all there is to it.
I don't know how they get around this. It comes down to pride, I guess.
It does, Jimmy. And one of the ways, and I've seen this in years past, I haven't seen it so much lately, you'd see these billboards and there would be this husband and wife preacher team. And when I studied about that one time, what this woman said, the woman part of that team said, that her husband gave her the authority to speak. Unless her husband's name is Jesus or God, he didn't have the authority to give to her. And so, it's, the thing of it is instead of people trying to spend time getting around what God said, we just need to focus on doing what he said, because we know what he said was right. And so women have a tremendous responsibility. The Bible tells us that, and this is not part of James, but this is one. The Bible tells us that older women are to teach the younger women. They're to teach them how to be respectful to their husbands, how to treat raise their children, all these things that women, they've got the responsibility of taking these little tiny lives and molding and making them so that they'll become God's servers and spend eternity in heaven. That's a big responsibility. And so, when I was thinking about this morning, when here in James, I thought, I didn't say anything to that lady. I didn't want to be mean or hateful about it, but when she initiated the conversation, and you could tell just the way that she handled herself, that she thought that she was, pretty smart and had a lot of authority. And when we were leaving, that's when she let me know that she was ordained. I've still got teeth marks in my tongue. I couldn't say anything. But I thought, lady, you just need to focus on what God told you to do and quit trying to do what God didn't tell you to do. And it's the same thing with the rest of this. Because Paul says we all stumble in many things. And we do. I have a real problem sometimes having the right attitude when I see people doing things or whatever that I don't like. And so Sherry, she took me to the woodshed a time or two over that because I don't want to do that. We're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to be loving and kind and not try to find faults, but focus on the good things. But James says, if anyone does not stumble in word, he's a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Now, when he said that, what he was saying with perfect means that he has matured. He's grown up. And if you can handle your tongue, you can usually handle whatever other things that cause you to go astray. He said, and I love this last part, indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. And that's what the tongue does. The tongue can completely, if you meet somebody or see somebody for the very first time, and they never say a word, they're just there. We met a couple. Sherry's blood sugar went down real low, and we were out on the little deck outside there, and I thought, what can I do? And I thought there was a lady sitting across from us there that had an ice cream cone, and I thought that's what she can do. I can go get her a cone, and that ice cream will raise her blood sugar and keep her from having a problem. And so I asked that lady, I said, where did you get the ice cream? She told me. Well, that shit was easier for me to get around on than most, but I thought, I'm not sure where she is talking about. Go out the door, and a minute her husband's right behind me. This is a black couple, wonderful people. And he took me down there to where the ice cream was, walked down there with me, made sure I got it, and we come back. And I thought, what a wonderful, wonderful person, people those are. Found out he was a Baptist preacher in Spring, Texas, and really a nice fella. And I thought, he was the kind of individual that you ought to follow as far as the example is concerned, because he was doing something that Christians should do. And then he says in verse 4, and this is particularly interesting to me, because he said, look also at ships. Although they were so large and driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Of course, this is back in the days when they had those type of ships. That ship that we were on, and Jay and Leanne have been on the same one, a Jubilee, it holds 5,000 people plus 1,700 crew. That's a small town. And yet those ships can be maneuvered with a rudder, or whatever they do. I don't know. I didn't see one, but I know they got some way to do it. And I think, what James is saying is that, you've got this huge contraption, and it can be controlled or directed with that little small rudder. Those big ships, I'm sure they use other propulsion, different ways to motivate them, but still it doesn't have to be something huge. It can still maneuver the ship with something so small. So he said, even so, well, I didn't say wherever the pilot desires. That's another thing that James said. And so, when God put us together, he put our brain up here and our tongue down here, and that tongue is controlled by what's in the brain. And compared to size, the brain is much larger than the tongue, but the tongue gets us into so much trouble because the brain allows thoughts to come into our minds, and we can control that. And so he said, even so the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. And isn't that true? Isn't that true? My brother, we came back home yesterday, and we stopped at Palestine, and I told Sherry I hadn't even thought about that for years. My brother, whenever he died, my brother called me and told me he was in the hospital down in Palestine. If I wanted to see him, I need to go. And this was many years ago. And my brother was a small guy, smaller than me, and smaller built. But to listen to him talk, he was 10 foot tall, and he was all talk and little action, really, what it boiled down to. And so when James says this, the tongue's a little member and boasts great things. But, you know, God gave us a tongue for a reason. That's to communicate, but our brains have to be controlled or taught in order to communicate properly. And that's the problem with so many people. See how great a forest is a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, and reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no man can tame the tongue. And you know, people will read that and they'll say, well, you know, that's not really true. Yes, it is. No man can do it, but God can. And that's the problem. So many of these people, we heard so many people that talked loud, and I didn't hear that much profanity, but I thought, you know, I just wish your brains and your tongues were talking to each other properly, so we wouldn't hear that loud type of stuff, you know. We would usually move away from that and not have to listen to it. But then he says, with it, verse 9, with it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. And that's a serious statement right there. With that tongue, we bless or praise God. And with that same tongue, we curse men. But who has control over that? We do. And that's the thing that I have no way of knowing, certainly. We met 3 different couples that were Christian people, and I really enjoyed them. We didn't really meet that many other people. Met one couple that sat beside us in Granbury at a show. They said she knew every word of every song, and I thought, isn't that amazing? You know, that way in a big ship that far away, but they knew her, and we're thankful that we spoke properly and acted properly. He said, out of the same mouth proceed blessing. Now, you think about this. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. So, we go to church, we praise God, we ask for blessings on people or healings and all that sort of thing. And that same mouth allows the same tongue allows cursing to come out of it. And Paul says that shouldn't be. And you know, that's something that every person has to deal with. I mean, we live in a world where when we were kids, and I know I'm older than a lot of you, but when we were kids, my parents never ever used a profane word in front of me. Never heard it. My mother or my father, either one. Didn't hear it from my grandparents. You go out in public and you didn't hear it. You didn't hear it on television. You didn't hear it on the radio. And today we live in a society where people are constantly just spewing that nasty stuff out. And you know, I think about that. And some of those same people probably go to church. And probably would tell you that it's wrong to do that. But the devil is constantly working on our hearts and our minds, and for some reason or another, we are inclined to, and it doesn't have to be 4-letter words. It can be words that just, in other words, words that don't bless or they don't glorify God, I guess is the way I want to put it. So we need to be so careful of that, so careful of that. And you know, when you think about the influence that you have on others, John wrote in 1 John 1, 7 through 9, but if we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And we we enjoyed our trip, but I missed this. I missed this fellowship. You can go to those masses of people, and they're just people, and you'll meet, some like we met with that couple that I mentioned that helped us with the ice cream. You'll meet people like that, but you don't feel in fellowship with them because you don't have anything in common with most of them, or you don't know that you do. With James and Dorothy, what's his name? Wasn't James? Whatever name, Dorothy, I know Dorothy, but whatever Dorothy's husband's name was anyway, we felt commonality with them because they were Christian people. We may not agree theologically, but they were Christian people. And so we have to keep on thinking about how we act and how we're perceived by others, because there's a guy named Guy Woods that wrote one of the commentaries that I use, and he says, James seems to have in mind a difficult road beset by many dangers and containing many pitfalls. The faithful disciple, forced to follow it through life, often trips over unseen obstacles therein and stumps his toe on the stones of sin which are frequently in his path. And I've thought about that so many different times, that if Satan, if you could visually see Satan or sin personified, evil personified, you would go around it in every way you could. You wouldn't want anything to do with it. But evil is not something that you can see itself in itself. You see the results of it, the actions of it, and like with the little girl that was killed by the fellow there in Bridgeport, or wherever that was over there in that area. I saw him on television when they were reading his sentencing, and there was no remorse at all. It was just like a big deal, I killed a little girl. And evil is so horrible, and people, they don't really realize it, and that's why that I don't like to be around people that are talking ugly, or people that are living their lifestyles in the way that they did. It's just sad. But anyway, in James 5 and 6, 3, 5 and 6, he says, even so the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles, and the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. And we were watching news there one time not long ago, and showing the fires in California. And every time I see one of those fires like that, the first thing that comes to my mind is what started it. And very likely, it was a forest fire, a cigarette, a piece of glass, something small started it. And I've thought about that so many times. I've known a lot of people in my lifetime that they were married, had good marriages, and the marriages fell apart, and you often wondered, what started that? The husband or the wife, they didn't just wake up one morning and say, I want a divorce. It started before that. And so, the thing about it is sin is so deceptive. Satan doesn't come out and boastfully proclaim what he's going to do. He does it in little innocuous ways you don't even realize, and you're caught up in it before long. And so Paul says, anyone, we have to use our tongues properly, because we can. It's possible for any of us to trip and stumble with that tongue. In Psalm 120 and verse 2, David wrote these words, and I love them. He said, deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips and from a deceitful tongue. And, the old story about how can you tell if a lawyer's lying? And the answer is his lips are moving. Well, I don't think that that's totally true, because I've known some good men that were lawyers. But the thing about it is the tongue, which is just the way that we vocalize words, it can be led to say things that shouldn't be said. And how many times have you, well, maybe you haven't, but I have, said something and thought, man, I wished I hadn't said that. And I thought so many times, and I've told you so many times about Tommy Williams, my instructor in preacher school that I love so much. Tommy would never speak quickly. If you asked him a question, it seemed to me like it was forever, but it might have been 15 seconds. But then he would answer me. And when I asked him why, he said, I want to think about what I'm saying. I'll be 82 in November, and I haven't learned that lesson yet. I'm still working on it. I want to think before I speak. But, you know, you'll hear people in society, they'll say foolish things like, it's a free world, I can say what I want to. Well, you have the ability to, but it's not very wise to do that. And it costs nothing to be nice and to speak kind words. I've known people, even in churches, that left because unnecessary, unkind words were spoken to them. And I thought how sad that is, that anybody would do something like that, but a lot of times it's not intentional. And that's why we have to just be a little slower about slow to speak, quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, James says. In verse 8, there was another thing that I wanted to point out. He said that, but no man can tame the tongue. One of the things that Satan likes to do is to give us excuses for improper actions. So I spurt something out and hurt somebody's feelings or act unkindly, and I can say, but the Bible says no one can tame the tongue. But God can. God can. And that's the thing that we need to realize, that Satan wants us to use excuses. He's the master of excuses. And back in the Garden of Eden, he used excuses, to try to justify getting Adam and Eve to eat of the fruit that was forbidden. And he says that fire of hell comes from the tongue. Gehenna is the word that our word hell comes from. And Gehenna, it's an interesting place. It was a valley right outside the walls of Jerusalem. And nowadays it's kind of like our garbage dumps, where they take the trash and dump them. But back in the early days there of Israel, or Jerusalem, the Israelites would go out there and they would practice the idolatrous rites of the false god Moloch. And they would even offer their own children to their fire god Moloch. Can you imagine that? Taking your own baby and offering that baby as a sacrifice. So when Josiah came along, he instituted reforms. He said, I want all these altars torn down. They call them the high places, and the valley not be used for that anymore. I want to get rid of all the encouragement to do these types of things. And so they say that there was so much trash and stuff there that was dumped that there was a constant fire burning there. And so when people would die, they would just take the bodies down there and toss them into that fire. And so that place became a fitting symbol of the place of future punishment. And I don't know about you, but I've always had a very healthy respect and fear of fire. Years ago, when I was cleaning my place up there, I didn't know much about burning stuff. I hadn't really ever had any experience with that. So I would cut the brush and stuff, and I would pile it up in piles, and I would burn it. Well, one day I got this bright idea that I had all these piles, and I thought, well, what I'll do, probably as far from here to the door, maybe farther, I'll start a pile there, and I'll put a pile next to it, a pile next to it, and that way I can just burn this one, and then gradually they don't do gradual. Gradual don't work with that. And all of a sudden I had this massive fire going, and it scared me to death. And I thought, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get out of this. How do you stop a fire? You know, kind of like that old story about how do you start a flood. You know, I don't know. And so I just prayed, and I had a little small squirt bottle of water, but that wasn't going to do me much good. Well, thankfully God took care of stupid, you know, and took care of that. But you know, I think about how that there in Mark 9:43, this I think is one of the places where this word appears, and it's it makes no sense to me why well, of course most of these people aren't going to read the Bible, but when I think of good places and bad places, I read on the internet this morning that Houston is one of the big towns now that everybody wants to move to. Not me. I don't want nothing to do with Houston. I mean, I can't imagine that. Mark 9:43. Paul said, in fact, Jesus said, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. He said, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to enter into life maimed rather than having two hands to go to hell, Gehenna, to the fire that shall never be quenched, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. And so Jesus is telling people, you got to think about this. And I really think that some people have the idea, well, a lot of people have the idea that everybody goes to heaven when they die. That's just the normal thought process. But I think some people think, well, I'll get punished, but it won't last forever. And I had a friend of mine up in Arkansas, and he was not doing this. He didn't believe this, but he did things like this to make me think. And he said, just think about this. He said, a fire that never goes out. He said, that's not possible. Every fire goes out. But Jesus said, this fire will never be quenched. And so when a person doesn't serve God, and think about this with me, they don't serve God, they're sentenced to hell, they're going to be punished eternally. It'll never stop. I don't even want to think about that. And that's why years ago I decided I wanted to preach, because I don't want to see people go to some place like that, suffer punishment eternally, forever. And Jesus says that's the way it'll be. That's the way it'll be. I'll stop there and we'll pick up next Sunday. But just think about those things, and we'll finish up James next week. Thank y'all.